to talk to each other about their own oppression, their shared oppression, and what to do about it. Absolutely. And so that was one of the reasons we wanted to have this talk, because where else can we have conversations like this? So with that, I have to bring my phone back out. I don't know why I put it away.
Well, I have a question I think I can ask in the midst. Panelists, thank you for joining us today. I thought it would be really great if we could start with, what do you think are the root causes of some of the anti-Semitic attitudes, not just among Black people, but people in general, that we see this sort of rise as we saw, with AAPI and Asian hate during COVID. Tell us, what do you think are the roots of some of this behavior and some of the comments and actions we're seeing? Anyone can start.
I can say that antisemitism is the oldest form of hatred. It is the longest running, and so along with that comes a lot of time to develop a lot of these conspiracy theories in any number of ways over the years. And so here we are with Kanye West, and initially hearing some of his comments, and I have to admit as well with Kuma that I wasn't necessarily interested in finding out more about what he was saying or how he. To me, it was just hate speech. And also, most importantly, it was conspiracy theory that we've heard from, 100 years ago with this publication of the Elders of Zion. And so I quickly dismissed it as just more of that and not necessarily anything unique that he was saying.
Yeah, I think I agree with Aida. Anti-Semitism is one of the oldest types of hate. And to me, it's just completely illogical. We can go back in history and understand how specific stereotypes came to be. And I'm happy to dissect all of those, but we would be here for a long time. But it doesn't make sense. So I tend to think, well, why are people saying that? And I look to what's going on in our country, and there's a lot of issues that is dividing our country right now. And this is just a hypothesis, but Jews have been a scapegoat for a very long time. And it's very easy to blame societal issues on Jews because we've always been seen as other. We're different. We tend to look different. We eat different foods. We're different. And when society is having issues, it's easy to blame it on the other, the ones who you think are in power. And there's a whole stereotype about how Jews are running DC and Hollywood and the weather and space lasers, right? So why not blame it on the people who you think are in control of why you're being marginalized, why you're being pushed down? I don't know if that's true. I don't know Kanye's music. Ask me to name one song and I couldn't. But I can't help but think that these people with a platform are using anti-Semitism as a way to express their frustrations with other societal problems.
Yeah, I think it's just been something that's been bubbling, just like we think, as far as with people of color in general, we think, oh, it's finally going away, but I just think it's always been under the surface, and right now we're in a climate in our culture, I don't know if it's fear, obviously it's fear, but what other issues that they're back to being the new thing, the old thing again, so it's just more of the same thing.
This is not one of the questions we talked about, but I have to frame this in the right way. I should say, so my master's degree is in Near Eastern Judaic Studies, or as my friends call it, like a master's degree in Jew. But one of the things I ended up studying was just sort of the adoption of who was white in America. And it was always, depending on how many white people were in the place, would depend on how quickly new whitish groups would be accepted. And Jews, especially in the South, were included as white people very quickly because white people were outnumbered by black people. But in the Northeast, for example, Jews were not white for a long time. And I'm like, look at me, this face, right? the idea that race is fluid still kind of confuses me. And why I'm saying this is because I want to talk about the fact that Jewish oppression going on thousands of years, right, is then placed in a country where we are normally relatively fine, right? That history of oppression, we talk about every Passover, right? Like, it was us who was released from slavery. That is one of the reasons Jews in general have been more involved in civil rights movement, et cetera. And I guess my question is this, which is, two groups who most of the time agree on how they should be treated. Why and where do these conflicts come from? Like, so for people who don't know, one, we already talked about Kyrie Irving, but Kanye's anti-Semitic comments was mostly in interviews and in podcasts and whatnot, not in his music. His music is quite good, right? And we can talk about separating the artist from the art later, but someone who is already famous and wealthy and rich being mad at a group that he thinks controls the systems that made him wealthy and rich. Like, we talked about not being rational, but my question is, why would Kanye feel like Jews specifically are trying to put him down? Like, what in the experience of another oppressed group would make them want to strike out at another oppressed group? That's a long question, I apologize. That's how I operate.
It's hard to know what's going on in Kanye's head. You know, he himself, right?
That is fair.
I feel like that's the end of the conversation. Done.
Kanye, question mark?
What's going on? You know, he's admitted to struggling with some mental health issues, but that's not necessarily an excuse. It's an explanation. It doesn't mean it's an excuse. There could be so many triggering things that are happening for him. He's going through a divorce, lost his kids. You know, he's losing his fan base for comments that he said. So maybe he's doubling down. But I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, that it's easier to hate on a group that's already receiving hate than to take accountability for what you're saying and what you're doing.
Jesse, I've thought about this more than I like, but I think it's important to think about it and to identify, if you can, in one way or another, sort of the root cause of this issue. How is it that two groups who have been oppressed, victimized by the larger dominant group, who seemingly have a lot in common? And you're right. I mean, during the 1960s march in civil rights, there were many thousands of Jews that participated and fought for rights. I remember an older couple telling me that they got married in the 1960s, and then they were going on honeymoon, and you hear many of these stories, that they wouldn't stay in hotels unless they were integrated. And so you had a lot of citizens, both Jews and non-Jews, whites, who were also pushing and sort of demonstrating what needed to be changed in their own way. So how is it, going back to that, how is it, and right, so the history and the assimilation of the Jews in America, whether it was in the North or the South, is very different from what's happened with African Americans. It's all over you. You can't change it. Whereas, you know, with the Jews, there's, you know, some other ways of sort of assimilating, a much easier way. And, you know, not to mention that the Black community during that time didn't have equal access to proper education or any of that sort of infrastructure that existed. And so it's different. The oppression is not the same. It's not experienced the same. It's not felt the same. But I was thinking, and this is just me thinking, folks, I'd love for someone to shoot me an article at some point, but I was also thinking about the Nation of Islam movement that was really starting at that time, and the hold, and what it was trying to do within the community, which is to empower it and to build it up and to make it independent, essentially, in order to survive. But, however, and you know, and with current leader Louis Farrakhan, and the really horrible anti-Semitic rhetoric that comes out of that. And so I often think about all of these, and you know, and the African American community tends to be deeply religious. It has a very strong faith-based in any which way. What role does that play? What role does the empowerment play? So it's hard to say why we've landed where we've landed, but I'm sort of trying to say some of it was outwardly anti-Semitic trope that was present within the Nation of Islam and all of that. And you can't keep that contained. Of course it's going to go out into the community. Of course people are going to hear it. And that from that misinformation, more misinformation is then developed and then passed down to future generations. But here we are now perpetuating the same misinformation. Unfortunately, he has a huge platform, and thank goodness to social media that has brought us globally together closer. But it also but when you have rhetoric, hateful rhetoric like this, that can spread so easily, that's also the responsibility that he lacks. That's harmful.
You know, Aida, you mentioned something that I got my gears turning. You mentioned about the couple who wouldn't stay in a hotel unless it was integrated. I can't help but think back to my history classes in high school, where we learned that there were signs in America: no blacks, no Jews, no dogs. If I was walking down the street right now and you guys didn't know I was a rabbi, I would pass as just a white American, an Anglo-Saxon American. You wouldn't know that I'm a Jew. That's not necessarily the case for our African American friends. Looking through history, I wonder if the fact that Jews were able to overcome a barrier by being able to blend in, while our African American friends had to endure systematic racism and couldn't progress in society in the same way that whites and Jews were able to, because we could just blend in, has anything to contribute to it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Right?
My gut was like, yeah, Mom.
Right?
That's the real conversation that I appreciate that we're having today, because it's like easy to look at Kanye and think he's got all the money in the world, whatever, but he's still frustrated with people that identify as Jewish, because in his perception, and I would think to many, it feels as though the gains have been so much more in comparison to that and the progress of Black people.
Right.
And we're thinking wealth alone, I'm not saying, but do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
And so as you were talking about the civil rights movement, I got really like, ooh, because I'm like, that's white people. I've never been taught that Jews were alongside us. Mm-hmm. I've been told that there were some white people marching alongside us. Does that make sense? So there's been a history tweak there that I think we could explore more deeply to help really get to the root of why we aren't really working together better.
I want to share with you a fun story about my childhood here, growing up in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma as a Jewish person, is that I didn't consider myself white, because to me, white people were Christian, right? And so because I was othered for something that had nothing to do with my appearance to me, I was like, oh, I'm not white, I'm something else. And that's something me as a Jewish person can talk about, right? But like, that's like in the history books, how do you talk about the different groups that helped another group do a thing, right? And it's again, like talking about race and Jews. Talking about Jews as a race also gets super complicated, because we are, we aren't, blah, blah, etc. Jews weren't considered a race until Hitler considered us a race. That's another story. Anyway. Yeah, I just wanted to tell you that fun story about me. But
but it leads me to think about the intersectionality.
Yes.
Right. And Aida, you were talking about your Ethiopian Jewish dinner that was recently held, and I thought, it never even occurred to me, really, right, that there were Jews in Ethiopia, right? So it's like, can you all speak to some of the intersectionality that might be at play here? And because I think there's definitely a piece there,
Okay.
and how we can pull it forward for some meaning and some lessons to take away as we continue this conversation.
So Ida passed the ball to me.
Yay!
So
okay,
I'll start
come
with
on
intersectionality. So I am a woman. I am a rabbi. Specifically, I'm a Reform rabbi. I am. What?
Sorry, I was just shouting out the
Whoop,
reform
whoop.
part.
Can you please educate those of us who are not familiar with reform?
What reform means?
Please.
Reform, in a nutshell, one sentence line, tries to integrate modernity with tradition. So we will adopt traditional Jewish beliefs and practices as long as it means that we can stay within the construct of what it means to be a modern human. So if there's a law that says you can't drive on Shabbat, but we live in the suburbs, which is 30 minutes away from our synagogue, we're going to drive to synagogue for services. So it's really trying to find out what it means to be a Jew in the 21st century.
Wow.
Yeah, I couldn't have been a Jew in Broken Arrow without being a Reform Jew, because there are no synagogues or shuls in Broken Arrow.
Right, trying to keep the kosher laws in Oklahoma, the barbecue's legit.
Yeah.
It is. So I'm a woman. I identify as a cis woman, she, her pronouns. I am a rabbi, specifically a female Reform rabbi. I am queer. I identify as bisexual and demisexual. I am an artist. I have all these different identities, and there are times that I wear specific hats, quite literally a ritual hat called a kippah, and there are times that I don't. I sometimes just want to go get my nails done and be Tzvia Jasper, who just wants her pretty nails. And I tell them that I'm a history teacher, because no one asks any questions about a history teacher. But there are times when I'm on a panel and I'm Rabbi Jasper representing Temple Israel in the Jewish community. And there are times that I'm in the Pride Parade, and sure, I might be Rabbi Jasper in that moment, but I'm also an out and proud queer human. And this last Pride Parade was my first Pride Parade. Out. And so there are times when I pull multiple identities into a specific situation, like now. I'm expressing all of my different identities. And there are times when I need to put them to the side. And I have that privilege. I have that privilege to be able to choose which hat I want to put on. It's not easy. I can't change the fact that I'm a woman, and that comes with its own barriers, certainly. But I can choose which identity I want to express in that moment. And I think that is a privilege and a benefit of being a Reform Jew in America. If I was in Israel, it would be very different. I walked around with a kippah, the prayer hat, in Israel, and all the time, I'm going to speak Hebrew, they're like, "Ma gver dat yeled?" They'd say, "Excuse me, miss, are you a boy?" That grammar doesn't work there for you, but okay. So I can't express being a Reform female rabbi in Israel like I can here. But at the same time, in Oklahoma, am I always going to go around with a giant Star of David? Is that safe? There's a lot of identities at play for my personal life. And in some cases, I really do get to choose when I'm presenting what.
Anyone else want to speak on that?
Do you really want me to? It's so complicated in some
It
ways.
is super complicated.
But I guess maybe in some ways it isn't. I was telling Kuma that I was born and raised in Ethiopia. This is what led me that's why we were talking about it. We had a wonderful event this past week. Some of you were there at the Jewish Federation. We were talking about Colors of Israel. And it's a series that we've had the beginning of the year where we're looking at the various groups that make up Israeli society. And this focus was on the Ethiopian Jews that migrated through several different large-scale operations back in the 1980s and 90s. And so we had a wonderful speaker who came and spoke, and she was one of the children who walked from Ethiopia to Sudan, ultimately was picked up by one of the large operations that I was telling you about. It's Operation Moses, and was taken to Israel. And so then once you get to Israel, and there are other black Jews, but the Ethiopian Jews are the largest group. Okay. I think she said currently today in Israel there are about 165,000 Ethiopian Jews. So we wanted to know a lot about the assimilation process and what that was like for her. I've also been very curious as a person of color. I grew up in Ethiopia, but I converted to Judaism later in life. So very different Ethiopian Jews, so she's one kind and I'm a different one. So, which is hard to talk. That's the part, I'm sorry. That's the part I said was difficult and just too long to get into. So, but how do we experience the world? Very, very similarly. Some people's eyes pop out when I say I'm Jewish. You're Jewish, and similarly, she was saying the same things. Outside of Israel, not a lot of people know about Ethiopian Jewry, and also, and that's why we're doing these programs. You can go to the Jewish Federation website and see what else we have upcoming. And then we paired it with the food, of course, because it's very unique. That's what their Judaism is also for them. Everything that comes with it. So I don't even know if I'm answering your question or not, but when it comes to that space, especially for living in America as a woman of color, Jewish, in the position that I have, there aren't that many of us. I can tell you that, and it is a strange place to be sometimes. But like Tzvia said, it depends on which hat I'm wearing that day. Mm-hmm. And some days it's both. I speak for. That's why I'm here today. It's Shabbat, but I have this little personal rule that I won't work on Shabbat. But I was telling Kuma, this doesn't feel like work.
Right.
This feels like, Saturday afternoon.
Conversation amongst friends.
I'm not necessarily representing the Federation. I'm just representing what needs to be said.
Yes. Thank you so much.
I hope that answered it.
No, that helps. Reverend Jeannie, you want to add anything about intersectionality?
Yeah, I love a woman, Julie.
Aww.
And
I love that.
Yeah, and what I think about, I know sometimes Julie will say, well, we have to be careful going here. We're planning on a trip going to the South. And they're going to see this biracial lesbian couple. I think, well, they're not going to necessarily know if we're lesbian, but what they will think, and people often think at first, from a distance at least, that I'm a guy. So this is where we're going to maybe have a problem. They're going to think black man, white woman type thing. So I think about that. I think I'm noticed more, I think, understandably, right off, as a black person first.
Yeah.
So my mind is always thinking about, okay, if I come into this space that's primarily white, are people going to be afraid of me? Are they going to trust me? I need to be careful when I go in the store that I don't look like I'm going to take something, all that kind of stuff that goes through my head.
Through my head too. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things I think about a lot. Thank you for sharing that. Do you have a question?
No, I just felt really happy hearing biracial lesbian couple. It just made me feel happy.
I know,
I was just like, that's beautiful. All right, so let's try not to pivot to a positive, but what's great about Tulsa is that if we see a problem, Tulsa is both big enough to have lots of serious problems, but small enough to be able to start working on those problems almost immediately. So, as leaders in the Tulsa community, what can we do to both help oppressed groups in town sort of work together to fight that oppression, and within ourselves and our own groups, make sure that we are not demeaning others in the process of lifting ourselves up? That was the sound of me asking a good question. That was good. That was good.
Education, I guess. Education is, Kuma and I were talking at the beginning, and, you know, and I was saying that, like, this is a space that I wish was bigger. I'm comfortable in this space. I'm comfortable with the audience. You're comfortable with me. Obviously, there's no question. I don't walk into this room, like what Reverend was saying, and wonder so much how I'm going to be perceived. So how do we make this space bigger and accessible in a way that's non-threatening, non-judgmental? You know, allowing the discussion to take place, the people to ask the questions. I mean, most of hatred is ignorance. So how do you correct that information? And that's the responsibility I feel we have, is to create that space and to invite people to join you as much as you can. It's you know, in Judaism, I mean, one of the things I absolutely love is that when you see oppression taking place, you speak out. You don't speak out just when it's happening to you. You speak out when it's happening to others as well. So I love that sort of thinking and that sort of way of behaving, that you do have a responsibility. You have to join. You have to come together, not just in good times, obviously, but also in bad times, to support one another and to continue to enlarge that space, so that more people see you, more people want to come in and maybe have that conversation. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Education is where it's at. We were talking about the civil rights movement. In Judaism, we love to bring in Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with the Reverend Martin Luther King, marched side by side. And Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, it's not enough to pray. We have to pray with our feet. We have to get up and actually do something about it. Education is so important, but it's also very taxing. Being the people that have to educate everyone else all the time is exhausting. But it's so important. And having a group of leaders, having a group of people, anyone can be a leader, it's not just the people up here. We're all leaders by coming to this event. To stand up and take a little bit of that load of educating is so important. We know what's happening in the government right now with all the anti-trans bills. We know that this is going on, that anti-Semitic comments are happening, that racism is happening, that honestly there's a lot of things that need fixing. And how can you expand all of yourself to cover all of those topics? And it's really hard, and quite frankly, you can't do that. But having people take ownership and stand up and do something is the beginning. You know, we can write to our politicians. We can say, no, not all of Oklahoma is in the name of Jesus. There are other people in Oklahoma, Governor. It's by taking those first steps and getting your friends together, getting your communities together, and just doing the thing.
Yeah, it's so easy for us to be comfortable in our groups of the people we agree with and everything. I think we need to find ways to have conversations with people that bother us, that have said things that bother us or believe things that are different. So, if we do hear a comment or something, to have a conversation and find out where does that come from and what is your story. And I think that if people would open up, that word vulnerability now, that's what can bring us together, and to have compassion and empathy. So to have those conversations with people that are difficult, to find out what's your story, and I bet they would probably, that touch of humanity, they would feel that. So I think that's a starter.
That's great. Thank you.
Kuma, I feel like this is actually one question you can also answer, considering the work you do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we have conversations with people who have said hateful things towards us, right? Or even without saying it, are fine in a system that causes others harm?
Lived experience is an incredibly powerful thing, right? And we all have such an individual, unique lived experience. And I am finding, and a shift in my own work has been, how can I blame or judge or cast judgment or sort of look at someone with any sort of negativity when I am not literally in their shoes, right? Perception is reality for so many. It's just really a hard thing. I appreciate Tzvia, is that right? Her beautiful name. I love that you said, we have to do this. You were quoting this other rabbi about our feet, using our feet.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can embrace connecting across difference, the more we can have real, honest conversations about hard things, not only with people close to us, but also when we do that, we will be more open to having conversations with people that are farther away from our identities. I think therein lies the piece. I'm actually writing a book all about connection, and I feel like it is one of the things that we don't lean in enough on. We're so divided, and it's so hard to sit near each other and engage in some really challenging conversation, and we have to do it more, and therein we will solve so many more of the challenges I think society is experiencing. One question I had that is just really kind of ringing in my ears still, I haven't got that good glowy feeling I like to have when we're doing interviews. I feel like there's some real talk still to be had. One of the questions here says, what are the role of celebrities in terms of using their platform to sort of speak against people who might be using anti-Semitic language, all that kind of stuff? What is the role of the celebrity? And I want to say that, yes, I appreciate that we are having that conversation. We need to have that conversation. What is the role? But do we think there is a role, as we talk about working to, across intersectionality amongst our communities, for the Jewish community to use every bit of force, value, power, privilege that they have to help lift up, right? And in saying that, it's like that. Let me step back. I'm a practitioner, someone who believes in equity. Equity is the redistribution of power. It is throwing away ego and saying all rising tide lifts all boats. So I just want to put that out there. I'm not saying that anti-Semitic rhetoric is appropriate. I'm never saying that. I'm just saying, is there a responsibility of Jewish people to recognize that they have seen incredible gain and to be much more specific and direct and laser focused with effort to help lift up those who might not have seen the same gain? Hopefully that made sense. Anybody jump in.
Yes.
Right before you asked that question, I was going to say we as Jews have to recognize the racist tendencies within our own group and call that out.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the same time, calling out anti-Semitic things that are said towards us. So
Exactly.
we can't just declare ourselves to be perfect and move on, because we are not.
It can feel silent when we as people of color, black people, I'll say black, are experiencing what we experience because we can't change how we look. And that privilege of seeing Jews sort of move in and out of when they want to claim Jewishness or not, it can be perceived that way. So what responsibility? Yes, that was just kind of something that's bothered me.
So I think we have a huge responsibility. A lot of Jewish rhetoric goes, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. That's kind of the Jewish mantra.
That's the black mantra too.
How surprising.
Right? And I think you're exactly.
Right.
I think that the comment doesn't end there. I think it's they tried to kill us, they failed. They tried to kill our neighbors. What are we going to do about it? Now let's all together eat. It's so important for us to work together and to be allies. I cannot even imagine what it would be like to have the experiences that yourselves have of the African American community to have. Those aren't my experiences. I do have the experiences of anti-Semitism. That being said, hate is hate, and the more we stand together, the stronger we are. Right. We need to be allies, and it's hard when you're kind of in the midst of anti-Semitism to also give a part of yourself for another community that is struggling. But I think it's when you do that the conversations can shift away from anti-Semitism and racism and into education.
I mean, very few people just hate Jews and Jews alone.
Yeah.
Right? Hate grows, right? So I would love to meet someone who just hated Jews and that's it. Loved everybody else.
Right.
Had no problem with LGBTQ people, black people, just Jews.
Sure.
Like, I've never met that person.
Right? The epitome of hate, Hitler, didn't just hate Jews.
Yeah, so
everybody.
It's recognizing that we all, as oppressed groups, there at times feel like another group is getting an easier go of it. Mm-hmm. And I can see how other groups would think Jews have it fine, like, what are they complaining about? I get it. But then, like, for example, let's talk about Jews in Hollywood for a second, real quick, because this is something I can very quickly sum up. The reason why there are a lot of Jews in Hollywood is because at the time Hollywood and TV were born, there were Jewish quotas in law schools, medical schools, lots of careers that Jews wanted to go into. You know what didn't have quotas? Hollywood. So we went where we could, right? And so now there are just a lot of us there. And it's one of those, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of hate where a group gets accused of being good at the thing they were forced to do, right? So I just want, I'm a historian by background, so you're going to get a lot of history here. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's the same thing with the Jewish stereotype with money. We were forced to be money
we
lenders.
were forced to be,
We were good
forced
at
to be
it,
bankers. We didn't want to be. So, but now we have all your money. So, haha. Just kidding. I don't have it, but
it's on the Jewish space ledger.
yeah.
That takes me then to a question I'd love you all to speak to. I did a panel, a conversation with Kazu Haga, who owns the Peace Academy out of San Francisco. He spoke to what is beloved community. And as we talk about yay or nay, and it's definitely a nay for us, we all agree, right? Mm-hmm. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about how we continue to build beloved community. And I appreciate education being a facet of that, but we got to get beyond education because we've been talking about it for a long time and we're still not educated. I'm still just meeting Aida for the first time today, right? Like, and learning about. So how do we continue to build beloved community here in Tulsa and with each other? And does it have a meaning? What is that meaning to you all, each of you individually, as you do your work?
Well, we were having a conversation earlier that as groups, we need to support each other, celebrate with each other, and support each other when we're, if something happens. Right. So that is one way to build beloved community.
Yeah. Jewish Juneteenth? Yeah?
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, there'll be some good food.
There'll be some great food. Tzvia, do you have any thoughts on beloved community and how we build that?
Beloved community, for me, means opening the tent. I will be the first to admit that there is a Jewish problem with welcoming BIPOC individuals. We struggle because a lot of Jews tend to look the same. We're Eastern European. Let's ignore the fact that there's other types of Jews, right? That's the stereotype, is that we're Eastern European. But that's not the case. There are other types of Jews, and there are other types of religions, and there's other types of people in our community. And I think in the Jewish community, it first starts with making sure that BIPOC individuals feel safe and feel comfortable in our communities. And once we can really make sure we can do that, at the same time, we should also be making sure that we're spending time doing interfaith work. We're spending time with our neighbors, opening our doors as much as we can. We always have a security guard, and so safety is always something that we're nervous about. So I get how the Jewish community sometimes struggle to do multiple community events because it's scary for our safety. But I think it's time to really open those doors and try again and keep trying and keep just praying with our feet, just doing the work.
Thank you.
Of course, I agree. And Kuma, I appreciate this question. I appreciate the question that you had before about the responsibility. And I didn't know how to answer that. I really didn't. I was like, what responsibility? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know, initially it was kind of like, where are we going with this conversation, you know? But here's, organizationally speaking, now if I can put on my Federation hat and not my Aida hat, 2 weeks after the Kanye thing was let out, we were on high alert as an organization because of bombing threats that were being called in to other Jewish organizations, and there was a whisper that it might happen here, and so we had to go into that mode. Security's constant on our minds, constant, because the threats aren't necessarily just coming, from the right or now it's the left too. Extremism, of any kind. But so it's a constant thinking that goes on when we're putting on an event, and based on who we're targeting, what audience, is it open? Is it to the public? Is it internal? Is it all of these conversations and considerations have to take place when we're just trying to plan a program. And the added security now is just a permanent part of what we do. And so then I was thinking about, is this somehow tied into Kanye? Because it seems like every time there is a national anti-Semitism of some kind, the threats happen. And you don't even know where it's coming from. You can't necessarily predict anymore that it's this fringe, right-wing underground group. They're out there. It's flyers in Oklahoma City that were recently disseminated that were completely legal. They said all sorts of hateful, wrong, information about Jews, but legal. Similarly, so just on Thursday, there was another incident at OSU, a group putting stickers everywhere denying the Holocaust ever took place. That's what we were saying at the beginning. So, the responsibility, I feel like, well, hold on, we're out here, we're educating, we're open, we're willing to engage in every which way, but these people have a responsibility when they speak.
Yeah, agreed. That's fair. Thank you. Well, I don't know if we want to turn it over and ask some questions from the group.
Sure.
Hey.
Earlier, I'm sorry, Aida, right?
Aida, yeah.
You mentioned the elders of the protocols of the elders of Zion, and how a lot of the rhetoric in that horrifically terrible and forged document still exists today, so prevalently. So, what can we do that hasn't been done in the last 100 some odd years since that was published and distributed in America by people like Henry Ford?
It's going to take time, but also to answer Kuma's question that I couldn't answer earlier about responsibility. I think we have a responsibility to force the conversations to take place. They just can't be done behind, whispers, and not that Kanye is necessarily doing that, but I mean, to call it out. I mean, we have a responsibility to say this is wrong. And going back and tracing the various Jewish stereotypes, whether it's money, Hollywood money, large cities, the formation of large cities, back in the 1800s and 1700s occurred because of trade. And those that were trading at the time were Jews, and others were coming in, and then the formation of these cities took place, and it grew, and that's how, way back when. Anyway, but that's how it started. But what I'm saying is, anti-Semitism is the oldest form. I mean, it has followed us over 5,000 years, and it just continues to happen. So identify that, okay? That's what it is, and then have the difficult conversations. Why do you think Jews run banks? Is it because you know one Jewish person that works at a bank, or is it? I mean, what is it? Or do you hear? I mean, what? That's the misinformation we have to correct.
By the way, fun historical fact, not fun. I don't know why I said fun. There was a time when a published version of the Protocols of Elders of Zion was in every Ford that Ford sold, because Henry Ford was like, we gotta get the word out. By the way, Henry Ford, best friend was Jewish, so figure that out in someone's head. It wasn't Jews, it was other Jews that he was afraid of. It was international Jews, right? The interesting thing about anti-Semitism is it morphs and changes depending on the situation, what Jews are doing, and what the people at large are doing. Yeah. And that's the one reason I think it's been able to exist for so long, is it just changes depending on what Jews are doing at the time. So if we're doing well in one thing, that's going to become an anti-Semitic trope. And again, we are in Tulsa, very close to a very large bank owned by a Jewish person, right? Which George Kaiser started that bank because he couldn't get loans at the other banks, right? So again, the difference between stereotypes and facts are context, and so sometimes just boring people with context. Also laughing at them when they're stupid, right? You read the Protocols of Elders of Zion, it is hilarious. It is every Jewish stereotype imaginable, just all thrown together at a meeting we are purportedly putting on.
Yeah, but people still believe it. That's the problem.
That's true, but I'm a fan of sometimes, if someone's coming at you aggressively with something that is wrong, laughing at them about it. Because you can't just be like, well, no, you're wrong. Like, hatred is not rational, so you can't respond to it rationally. That's not step one. Like,
I think it's similar to, if someone makes a misogynistic joke, being like, oh, tell me why that was funny.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Tell me. Oh, an anti-Semitic comment. Oh, tell me why that's true.
Yeah. If you believe most hatred comes from ignorance, which I do, again, Greg and Broken Arrow, a lot of people ask me some weird questions about Jews. And I never attacked them for asking, because in the asking, they were trying to get more information, and I was happy to give it to them. Yeah. But when they said it as fact instead of asking me first, then they got a mouthful of this. So, because there are two ways of handling interacting with other people. And there is there's laughing at it and then approaching them afterwards. There's calling them out on it. It really depends on the person, right? But like, in a real talk sense, the real talk we all need to be having is when we hear anything that is a stereotype about another group, we should be calling it out, whether it's our group or not. Especially now, especially in Oklahoma, all the time. So.
Yes.
First of all, thank you. There's a lot of wisdom and compassion here on this panel. Thank you all very much. Somewhat leading from the comment you just made is, to me, more interesting than the Kanye comments themselves, which were just playbook absurdity that we all know from millennia of this, though he has a huge platform, which makes it that much more troublesome, is the response to it, particularly the public response. And I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts on responsibility of other folks in the media, fellow musicians. We happen here at the Woody Guthrie Center right now, we have a display on the singer-songwriter John Mellencamp. he almost singularly came out at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame event and, you know, in non-family friendly language, you know, called out Kanye for this nonsense and said there's zero place for this in our industry, which is art and connection and all the rest. I thought Noam Kemp was really wonderful and almost brave for doing so, even though it's just common sense he's sharing. There wasn't a lot else of that coming from hip-hop musicians, record company executives, the rest of it, and I wondered if that occurred to any of you as being a kind of non-response that was troubling in its absence.
Mm. So I think we saw a lot of responses from a lot of celebrities, not nearly enough in my opinion, but I think there were certainly some good responses who said, no, what you said isn't right. And I think if you have any sort of platform, it's important to use your voice in when you're presented with such hate. But I think it's not necessarily always the celebrities that need to be the ones doing it. So I, without revealing any names, have some congregants, some high school kids who are at our local high schools here. And they're receiving comments like, Ye was right. You should go to the ovens. Hitler was right. I'm talking about these are comments in the last 2 months. And I don't want to bash our school systems, but the principals weren't educated. And what happened was the Jewish kids are standing up and fighting back and saying, no, that's not okay for you to say. And the Jewish kid is getting in trouble for fighting alongside the kids who were saying those comments. Because the school districts aren't seeing this as a problem, aren't seeing this as hate speech. And so I think, well, yes, I want the celebrities to come out. I want the big celebrities who have the big platforms to come out and say, this is horrible. I think it begins on a much smaller scale. I want to see in our schools that the principals and that our educators recognize that this is hate speech. I want to see our politicians recognize that this is hate speech. Celebrities are great, but I'll be honest, I don't really know musicians. I don't know celebrities. I can't tell you which Kardashian is which. I just don't. Because honestly, I don't really care about their lives. Like, I care about them in a greater sense that, like, I hope them all well. But, like, I don't care what their next beauty line is. I want to see the change at a local level. I want to see our educators stand up and say for our community, these comments are not okay. We need to protect our kids, whether it is anti-Semitism or racism. Whatever it is, that's what I want to see.
Do you think that, given our current legislation, our educators are able to stand up and say these things without having repercussions themselves?
Absolutely not.
No.
Like,
No, not in this current environment.
yeah, the fact that our current administration in Oklahoma can pass a thing saying that the Holocaust needs to be taught in schools, at the same time passing laws saying that we can't talk about the Tulsa race massacre, is a bullshit. You can't talk about one thing and not include. Here's the thing: Jews, black people, Muslims, queers, whoever, learn American history and know from the second they are born that history is not theirs. It is not going to reflect horrible things that has happened to them. They are already uncomfortable. So don't pass laws saying you can't be made uncomfortable in your history class, because it's not us. We're already uncomfortable. It's the people who don't know this who are feeling uncomfortable. And I'm sorry that they have to feel uncomfortable, but that's what history is, right?
That's where I get frustrated about the responsibility part, because I'm like, okay, it's a slippery slope. If you can't talk about one without the other, then why aren't we mobilizing, coalescing around the fact that what you do to one, you're doing literally to the other? And that, to me, like, transcends legislation that's like common sense on how we as people have to interact with each other. I get frustrated that there's not like a wider outrage or outcry of people against all of it. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But we try to hierarchy, one's worse than the other. And when you taught, your comment to me was that hierarchy. Well, yeah, sticks and stones. Yeah, he made some comments, but you still have a lot of power and wealth and privilege and responsibility. Also, how are we largely responding to when we hear anti-Black sentiment, about hair and professional and wealth gap, and so it's just like we all need to be so much more angry about it, and we're just not there. Strategically angry, right? Like to really target. It's this quote. It comes up every single time. Lila Watson: "If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. Until you recognize that your liberation is bound up with mine, then we can work together. Until we figure that part out." That nothing, your power, Jewish power, privilege, but it means nothing ultimately if as humans we are still, there's oppression that exists anywhere. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so, gosh, it's just such a complicated, it just really fires me up about it because it's like we keep complicating it. It's human nature, human decency, and we have to get back to that. And it's pushing past fear. Fear is at the root of all of it.
Kuma, let me ask you a question. So you talk about Jews using their platform and their privilege to fight for, the fight against, let's say, Americans' systemic racism, right?
Yes.
For Jews, like, you have to understand, every time we put ourselves out there, we are clearly putting ourselves at risk, because anytime we use the privilege we're not supposed to have, we get accused of having said privilege. And like, I do it anyway, but growing up, it was very much like, don't ruffle feathers. Don't point out that we're here, be safe. And I'm like, that's not going to save us.
And that's what the natives feel, Native Americans feel.
Yeah.
And that's what my mama taught me. Girl, assimilate, be quiet, know your place, be Uncle Tom. Like, it's that every culture is giving these messages that ultimately are scaring us out of connecting more deeply with each other, having hard conversations, finding where we have so much commonality. That fear is a commonality. We're all very fearful. Yeah. I'm afraid to be here myself, right? As a Black woman, I know the violence that's perpetrated against Jewish populations. I thought about it, right? Like, so I just, I love you all so much. I want us to figure this out. It's just really, really frustrating, but really exciting that we are having real talk where we are hopefully getting to the heart of something.
Can I jump in real quick? And it goes back to the Holocaust legislation you were also touching on earlier. Maybe this is by what I do. I'm a consensus builder, and I love the passion, and I love it because it's there, and it is time. But we have to meet people where they are.
Sure.
And in a state of 4 million, passing that Holocaust legislation was really, really big. And here's why. Because Holocaust is not just about what happened to the Jews. Right. Holocaust education, talk about intersectionality. This is the main one that you can pull in. Whether you call it genocide, ethnic cleansing, and it's still happening today. It continues to happen today. So teaching the Holocaust, for me anyway, that's what it lends itself to. And it's not just about the 6 million that were murdered. It was the additional 5 million that were from all walks of life that they deemed to have an issue with. So yes, and when it is important to pass legislation that way, and we're in the final stages of helping develop the curriculum. And of course, the hope and wish and goal is that it is implemented the way we hope it will be, that all children 6th grades and on will be taught the Holocaust through social studies or language arts. And being very specific in this curriculum, what it needs to look like, and then additionally coming back around and helping teachers with resources and giving them the tools to be able to teach this in their classrooms. I know teachers are afraid. I know teachers will be afraid. And And that's the part that we can't do anything about.
Right.
You know, that's the part that feels so helpless in this whole process, is because they will be perceived as teaching critical race theory.
But it's legal, at least. There's a law toward it versus, I think about all the black children who are listening to the Holocaust. And my daughter goes, I've gotten so much on the Holocaust. Oh my gosh, I feel like I've learned so much. I got 0 on my own history.
Right.
So how do we not traumatize the youth that are sitting in the classroom who are being sort of, as part of education, rightfully so, learning about a horrible time in history, right? The Holocaust, but also not being acknowledged in their own personal, what they know of their own history. These are the problems that lead me down this. If somehow a teacher can get out of being afraid and because they have legislation backing them, teach Holocaust and then ignore what we know are a growing number of brown and black students that are sitting in these classrooms that are totally being, their history is not being, it's just so like the intersectionality of that and all, it's just so complicated. It's all tied together. It's like without one, there really can't be the other.
But how do we help our teachers who are being forced to report if one of their kids outs themselves to them, if they're trans? How do we help our teachers who are, their hands are being tied in what they're being taught? I feel lost.
Yeah, I totally
in
agree.
Knowing how to help anymore.
Right. Yes.
Teachers being limited by the law is, of course, I think, a horrible thing. But I think one of the things you were saying about what can we do, since we, as private individuals, are not, employees of the government, how can we be reaching out to these children and educating them on, of course, on the Holocaust, but on all of the other issues? And I grew up in another state, and the idea of the Tulsa race massacre was never brought up in my education. So how do we, as outside individuals, help with that education?
Well, if I may plug an organization who's represented in the room, if you have a teenage child, sign them up for OCCJ's Anytown Institute for Leadership, which I went to very long time ago, which even as a Jewish person was the first time I got to meet certain other groups in Oklahoma who I did not have experience with, because again, Broken Arrow is very white. There are opportunities outside of schools. As people in the world, we have responsibilities to those we raise and to those we are around to give them the opportunity to engage with those who are different in whatever way is possible to you. So if you can't do it in school, do it somewhere else.
Yeah, there's a lot of great organizations. Stand With Us, if you don't know that one, is a great organization that does a lot with anti-Semitism. And so I have the privilege of being a co-director of a Hebrew high school program for our Jewish high school kids in Tulsa. And we've been working with them all semester to talk about anti-Semitism. And they have internships and leadership programs where you can learn how to use your voice. And I think just there's a lot of wonderful nonprofits out there that can teach our kids how to stand up.
Yeah, I think of Campfire. Green Country Campfire is really good about including all kinds of kids.
Yes.
Very encouraging.
Well, great. I guess, yes, Bracken?
So, my question is sort of like addressing this. There's going to be a question at the end, so I'm telling you in advance there's going to be a question. We have to sit here for a minute. I think we here recognize that, I think a lot of people outside this room too, but we recognize that African American culture isn't a monolith. Jewish culture isn't a monolith.
Sure.
Native American culture is a monolith. Even Cherokee culture is not monolithic. So when we show up, like has been said, as our full selves, and we're able to show up as a multiracial Jew or a two-spirit LGBTQIA plus person who's Jewish and woman or whatever, I think naming those things goes a long way in sort of destigmatizing and demystifying things. People don't know a lot of things about me, but when I march in the MLK parade with the Jewish Federation, the Jewish Tulsa, that speaks to, I don't know, showing up and praying with your feet, right? So I think showing up authentically with your full full self, and being, like, wearing all of your hats at once is an important space to take up. It's important to take up that space, not just with, like, one identity or, like, part of it, but, like, with all of it. And it's hard and it's rough, and I know, and we can't do it all of the time because it is exhausting and it is a lot of emotional labor. But as much as we can, I think showing up fully and letting people see, like, you know, Jewish people aren't, like, they don't all look like a middle-aged white guy. They don't, like, you know, I don't know, like the whole blurs thing is blowing up, like the black nerd scene. Like, it's great to show up and be a black nerd. But it's also important for us not to just show up, like, it's great to see people that aren't, like, African Americans marching in the MLK parade because all of our liberation is bound up as one. It's great to see a bunch of people show up that aren't under the Two-Spirit LGBTQ platform in the Pride parades because all of our liberation is bound up together. We also have to show up in the hard times. So when protests are happening, when specific actions are happening, we have to be there for our friends and neighbors who are from different communities that we don't belong to, and show up as members of the community to back them up. So, like, the question then, given that sort of, like, stage or setting or connective tissue is, how do we go about better supporting folks? Like, it's outside of, like, parades and marches and protests. How do we better connect, like, as humans and not as activists? Because, like, I think as activists, we don't expand the room, to use Ida's words, as much as we could. We're sort of preaching to the choir, or, you know, we're preaching to the other people on the bema. How do we sort of build that community outside of, like, the activist circle or activist groups?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I do this activity, Bracken, called Cross the Line, and you ask like 50 questions, like right after another, and people cross the line. And I do that, and one of the questions is do you identify as a person of color? You cross the line silently if you identify, and you go back to your spot. Yeah. But at the end, I say, is there a question you could have walked across but didn't? And it's usually that one. And it's, well, I don't look Cherokee, so I didn't want to walk across the line. I'm not black, but my mom is black, but I didn't want to cross the line. It's usually someone not showing up or fearing that if they were to show up as their authentic self, that there would be some judgment, some outcry, some, calling him out, right? Well, I get it. Are you really black? How black are you? I'm like, well, from Africa. My father's African. But do you see what I'm saying? It's like, so I think people are very afraid of being called out when they lift up all of these intersecting identities. And that in it of itself is part of the problem, is because when I don't know how much we have in common, then it's easy to other you. And so I think there's something inherent fear in people. That's my response to that.
I would just say sometimes it's not about, like, if you're here to support me, you've already failed. Like, some people's role, right, as a white Jewish person, my role is not, the way I can help is by talking to people who will talk to me, which are sometimes groups that will not talk to Kuma. My job is to be uncomfortable and right in those situations and be comfortable talking about uncomfortable things, because sometimes to talk to a racist white person, you have to talk to them as a white person, right? And so you have to meet them where they are, right, in a way they are comfortable, in a Cracker Barrel, for example.
So it's a Cracker Barrel.
So not to stereotype racist white people, but the point being is the best thing, whatever group you are comfortable talking to who has issues, dealing with those, right? So that's dealing with the racists inside the Jewish community, right? Who the connection I have is we share this faith, right? And so I know where they're coming from, and I can know how to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
I do that in all the ways where it is already okay and where I'm already accepted in doing. It's using the power I have to do that, right? Marching is great, right? But it's much better for me to get somebody who I know and love who said a racist thing to stop saying a racist thing than it is to spend 2 hours waiting to start marching. That's a little critique at the Martin Luther King parade there. So, I mean, some groups are going to have better and more privileges in that sense. And so I feel like the onus is on us, especially Eastern European Jews, who look very white, right? We are in more spaces where we can fight for justice, right? I don't remember the exact saying, but it's like justice denied somewhere is justice denied everywhere, right? Especially in Oklahoma and in the South, we are taught to be polite and to not cause conflict, and that is the opposite the way we should be handling this.
Agreed.
Like when your friend says something hateful, call them out on it.
Yes.
And I would just go back to reiterating that to take that chance to reach out to somebody, be the first to take out your hand and or just smile, even just little things like that. They can just pull that connection together. Just little things like that we can start out with.
For me, when those things happen, don't ask me if I'm okay, because I'm not. I'm not okay. Instead, teach your children, right? Because we know that these ideas aren't born, they're learned. Mm-hmm. Teach your children what is right and what is wrong, what is hateful speech. Go out and tell me that you voted. I don't want to hear when people don't vote. I know too many people in my life who don't vote. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear, I voted, I'm trying to help.
I don't know that I can think of anything that hasn't already been said here. That's optimistic, okay, and here's why. I have children that are in freshman year of college, and both experiencing college very, very differently, especially when it comes to their identity. In some ways, I was grateful that we had moved along in a society, that they necessarily weren't experiencing what I had experienced. Similar, but modernized version of it, right? So there's that aspect of it. But the other thing that I'm so optimistic about is they speak out, unlike I think we did. When we were at that age, or, that fear that you were talking about, fear of being rejected for any number of parts of myself that someone would. They, with this group, my daughter was at a fair where you can pick out various clubs, or be introduced to various clubs. And she wasn't going to stand for a club that she felt was going to exclude her based on her ethnicity, and that she identified as Jewish, and any number of things. And so that's the part that I'm empowering. Talk about programs like Stand With Us and bringing in any sort of OCCJ. Yeah. I think that's where the investment needs to be. I think that's where you put all your focus. Is about educating them and empowering them to speak up, because they're much louder than we are, and they're much more connected to one another than we were. I think we were still very much segregated. I mean, I talk about myself as if I'm ancient, but like growing up in the 80s and 90s, like I'm talking about that. For you,
the 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah,
just to clarify that.
I have some staff members. You won't believe the conversations we have, but so it wasn't that long ago, and you've seen a drastic change within this generation, and you ask yourself why. What's going on? I mean, I think we're living in a much more diverse groups, areas. We select to live in those areas. We look for those areas, whatever diversity means to us, and I think they're running similarly. So I think that's where the energy needs to be.
That's great. Well, hey, Jesse, I think we just did a real talk.
We did. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Can I get a picture with you guys really quickly?
Yeah.
Bracken, would you take a picture of all of us?
As long as you send it to me.
I will.
There's going to be a conversation at the Tulsa Artist Fellowship's Archer Studios on women authors. to check out more, follow us on the internets. We're on the Facebooks, the Twitter, citycollective.com. And you can hear our radio show, Focus Black Oklahoma, this Sunday at 3 p.m. or every third Sunday of the month at 3 p.m. on KOSU. Tomorrow. And also you can check out our podcast on anywhere you get your podcast. You can go to npr.org, check out our podcast. Yes. Thank you for coming, everybody. And thank you, everybody on the panel and the speakers and Woody Guthrie Center.
I'm going to do the little Woody Guthrie plug part of things and just thank you all again for coming out. And next Thursday, if you want to join us right here in this theater, we're going to have the Black Opry Review with Queen Esther and Nikki Morgan. That's going to be a black bluegrass and folk show. So join us back here. Thank you.